Hello, my name is David. I'm a 52-year-old retired IT security consultant from Stoke-on-Trent in central England. It's now April 2022 and I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes about my recovery journey following a severe brain injury. In July 2015, at the age of 45, I suffered a head injury following a collision between my bicycle and a 40-mile-per-hour car. The impact resulted in much bleeding in my brain, giving rise to dangerous swelling, so neurosurgery was required to relieve the pressure. I remained comatose for the next 28 days. When I emerged from my coma, I experienced something called locked-in syndrome for 6 days, where all I was able to physically do was move my eyes. I couldn't speak, move my limbs or even my head, but I could observe things going on around me and understand spoken words. I spent a further 10 weeks in hospital for rehabilitation. Towards the end of this period, I was well enough to be independent of nursing care and reach my goal of being discharged. I think back now on how I experienced a mild sense of euphoria at the thought of being home again. I rather naively, but not unexpectedly, considered that my biggest challenge was behind me. As it turned out, I spent the first few months at home doing little more than getting through each day. I didn't exhibit any obvious disabilities, but my brain just didn't feel like my own anymore. I typically used the word cloudy when asked how my brain felt during this time. I knew the term was futile, but it was the only way I could answer the question. Maybe if you're suffering from a brain injury yourself, you can recognise the challenge of describing to doctors or loved ones how your brain feels. Perhaps the most straightforward explanation you give to people is that you simply don't feel normal anymore. While viewing this video, it'll be impossible for you to reconcile the contented face in front of you with the person I was in those first few months of recovery at home. Like many folk who've experienced a brain injury, I was learning to become familiar with the new me. Firstly, there was dealing with some of my clinical symptoms. A prime one, like many folk experience after a brain injury, was getting used to having a pretty much useless short-term memory. I'm extremely glad that I persevered with numerous coping strategies which I was encouraged to attempt. For your information, I make notes of things like a lunatic. Perhaps more challenging, for me, was dealing with the feeling of having no useful purpose in my life. I knew this outcome wasn't through laziness. I just couldn't do stuff. I genuinely felt I'd never go to work again, drive a car or go on a holiday, the kind of things which might be considered normal. I was confused, disorientated and felt helpless. I look back with pride at the resolve I demonstrated in never complaining. I did everything in my power to avoid being burdensome to my loved ones. Please try to be mindful that while you're the person experiencing the clinical symptoms from your traumatic event, you're probably not the only one suffering. It's likely that your loved ones are experiencing immense confusion and uncertainty at the circumstances they find themselves in. Their situation is clearly different to yours, but in its own way no less severe. They may exhibit anger and frustration just like you may be. They may also be looking at their immediate future in a state of bewilderment and feeling distressed at being seemingly unable to influence matters. While trauma is typically centred on a single individual, it certainly affects the whole family. So, after 12 months of doing relatively little of myself, I recognised that I needed a new life purpose. Returning to my previous job in IT security seemed an entirely unrealistic proposition. That line of work felt like from a time when I lived on a different planet. Instead, I became determined to look into voluntary sector opportunities. It's the most rewarding decision of my life. I started out with dog walking, then helping out in the storeroom of a local charity shop. I progressed to a befriending role with the Royal Voluntary Service, which saw me sitting and chatting with an elderly person who was lonely. I say chatting, but in the most part it was listening. I found that simply offering an ear was enough to ease the loneliness for many folk. Befriending was minimal effort by me, but extremely rewarding for both of us. I then undertook the role of an IT buddy at my local library, which involved assisting the elderly or unskilled to use the shared computers. I've helped create dozens of Gmail accounts, assisted folks to access their energy utility accounts online, and advised people on how to install free newspaper and weather apps on their mobile devices. Another common theme was organising people's numerous photos on their mobile phones into libraries by year, so that they didn't need to scroll through potentially hundreds of pics to reach the one they had in mind. These tasks weren't particularly challenging for me, but they helped me to feel useful again. The boost in my self-worth, which I gained during my year of volunteering, indirectly led me to resume my professional career in IT. This happened in 2017 with the London's Met Police, a full 2 years after my injury. The Met had chased me up several times during my first 18 months post-injury, where I felt I could only politely, but frustratingly, push back on their inquiries. However, with my confidence boosted by my volunteering endeavours, I eventually said yes. Following my return, I continued working for 2 further years as an IT professional with various customers, before a legacy of my brain injury intruded. I'd always been good at picking up new skills, but now recognise that I no longer had the ability to retain the knowledge of any new technologies I attempted to learn. This realisation meant it was time for me to retire. To provide a little balance in my story, I don't want to give the impression that I've recovered to exactly as I was pre-injury. I still have numerous limitations, but I've worked hard on strategies to cope with them. Beyond my severe short-term memory deficiency, I no longer have taste or smell senses, my touch sensation is hugely impaired, and I don't recognise feelings of pain in most circumstances. The latter sounds like a positive outcome, but is really not a healthy situation to be in. I could dwell on my aforementioned limitations, or exhibit frustration at the things I can no longer do. However, my mindset is to recognise and appreciate the things that I can still do. I've learned of a brain injury survivor who wrote about her recovery on a web page and expressed it succinctly in the following statement. I want to share what I consider the thing that makes every painstaking minute of recovery worthwhile. The silver lining, if you will, is all of the moments of life I didn't miss out on thanks to my good fortune of surviving. I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment. If you've recently experienced a traumatic event, you may be in a hospital ward pondering what your immediate future looks like. Or maybe you're beyond the hospital stage and have been discharged home and are thinking, what should I do next? I just feel so aimless. Either way, you're likely to be feeling challenged by the next phase of your recovery. I'd call it striving for normality. I personally found that occupational therapists led me along a path out of the trauma wilderness and back to what I considered normality. The following is a definition for the role of OTs which I think is spot on. Occupational therapists help people to regain the function needed to be independent and lead a fulfilling life. Please try to fully engage with your OTs whenever they appear on your radar. It may take many months or years before you consider your recovery to be satisfactory. I'm keenly aware that every trauma is different or unique, both in the context of the severity of the event itself and your likely recovery journey. It's highly likely that you won't recover to exactly as you were prior to your traumatic event. Please accept your new self. I implore you to keep hope alive and don't give up on yourself. You will make it.